Really is we are looking at the 3 days that happened over 2,000 years ago, and we found that these 3 days, and we're going to find out even as we continue in the weeks to come, that these 3 days are the most relevant to each and every one of us. And this is what we call Easter in our day and age. And what we call these days is Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, which according to the Bible is really the most significant weekend since creation. This series is for those of us who probably have a pretty good relationship with God. You feel like things are happening right now for you. You're serving Him, you're loving Him, and you're just enjoying the season that you are in. And my hope is that this series will begin to give you perspective, so that whatever life throws at you, it will not injure your faith, or you can be able to handle whatever it throws at you. This series is also for those of us who are walking with Jesus, but then stuff has happened in the past that has caused you to be in a space where your passion for Him has cooled off, your love for Him has sort of gone down, and maybe you are even left with some unresolved questions. And my hope is that this series will be able to answer those questions. This series is also for you. Maybe you're coming to church or you're engaging in a church after a very long time, and for us, and for my desire for you is that you can be able to be in a space where you can understand, even as we talk about the real life issues that we're going to be talking about and mentioning during this series. Last week we went through the events that happened around the death of Jesus. And what I said during this time is that we were trying to answer the question, what do you do? What do you do when you feel that God has abandoned you to defeat? What do you do when you feel that everything that you had hoped for has come to an end? And the thing that we learned last week is that your current situation is not a reflection of what God feels about you. Your current situation. That whenever you're going through those moments where you're wondering whether God really loves you, and if He loves you, why would He allow something like that to happen? Why would He allow something bad to happen to you? We learned that, you know what, we need to look at the cross and see what Jesus did for us. And the thing that He did for us cannot be compared to anything on this earth. There's no miracle, there's no blessing, there's no job, there's no spouse, there's no individual who can surpass what God did for us on the cross. So whenever you go through those moments where you're wondering whether God really loves me, look at the cross, look back at your situation, and then look back at the cross and see that the thing that God did was greater than anything on this earth. Because your current situation is not a reflection of what God feels about you. Today we want to talk about Saturday, which is the next day. And here is the thing. So much happens on Friday and Sunday. In fact, you'll find that these are the two most written about, studied about, talked about, preached about days in the Bible, especially in the history of the Easter story. Yet very little happens on Saturday. In fact, there is very little that is written about the day in between. And you'll find that the second day is one of those where you're even wondering what really happened on this day. So I want to pick it up from how Friday ends, the day before Jesus has been crucified. And we're going to pick this up from Matthew 27, from verse 57. If you can just put that up for me. As evening approached, now this is Friday evening we're talking about. There came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. And going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate ordered that it be given to him. And then it continues. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, which was the culture, and placed it in his own new tomb that he had cut off out of the rock. He rolled a big stone in front of the entrance to the tomb and went away. And that marks the end of Friday. Jesus is dead. Jesus is buried. It is over. What do we do now? What happens on Saturday? Because the body of Jesus is in a tomb. He lies in a tomb. And I wonder what the disciples, I wonder what the followers of Jesus were thinking at this moment. These guys had left their nets. You remember, those of us who were here in January, I talked through our series, I Follow. These guys had left their nets. Others had left their boots. Others were tax collectors. The others were fishermen. And Jesus had picked them up to change the world. This is what is happening. They had seen Jesus do miracle after miracle. They had seen their friends get healed and relatives get healed. They had followed Jesus down to Jerusalem and through every other town. They had endured the persecution of the religious leaders. And now the Messiah is dead and he's in a tomb. What do we do now? How do we go about it? And they are probably going back in their minds, how did we get fooled? And indulge me here for a minute, because this is what these guys are thinking probably. Maybe we should never have accepted his invitation. We should never have said yes to him. And if we said no to him, probably we'll have been at the place where we are richer fishermen. Or those of us who are tax collectors will have been filthy rich. And I mean literally like filthy rich. Maybe this thing, maybe we should have trusted or listened to the Pharisees. Maybe they were right. Maybe this thing is all about just observing the law. This stuff about transforming people and transforming the world and changing people to become Christ-like, this all was a hoax. See our lives now. Where are we? Or maybe Jesus was just a great religious teacher, but he wasn't the Son of God, as he told us, because how comes he's dead? How comes he's been buried? Was it a hoax? Was he a hoax? Everything that he told us about being the Son of God, being the Messiah. Did we waste 3 years of our lives following someone who knew very well that there was no future for us? Where do we go? What do we do next? And this is probably what is going through their minds at this very moment. And then little did they know that on the other side of town there was a conversation that was going on. And this involved the religious leaders. You remember last week I talked about the religious leaders. And these were the Pharisees, also known as the teachers of the law, but also the chief priests. And this conversation involved even the governor Pilate. And this is one of those conversations that if you had an ounce of hope, if you had a bit of encouragement that your situation will change, this is one of those conversations that kills everything. Because this chief priest and then the Pharisees, they woke up to Pilate, and we are told in verse 62 of Matthew 27, the next day, the one after preparation day, now the preparation for the Passover, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate, and they said, we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver, referring to Jesus, said, after 3 days, I will rise again. Now these guys remember that Jesus had indeed said he's going to rise again. And they are concerned about that. And maybe it's because of the things that they had seen Jesus do, the miracles that he had done. And maybe for them they thought to themselves, this guy might actually pull this thing off. He might actually pull off this thing of rising on the third day. So Pilate, this is what you need to do. Give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the third day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. This last deception will be worse than the first. And these guys concoct a story over there, and they didn't want anything that suggested that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And so Pilate gives the order, take a guard, go make the tomb as secure as you know how. So they went and made the tomb secure by putting a seal on the stone and posting the guard. Now when the stone was rolled, the Roman seal right there is they'll put a rope across the rock, and then it was a wax rope, and then also they'll put clay on the end, one end and one on the other end. And this is really for you cannot be able to touch that seal. And then also the guard, it wasn't one guard. A guard was consisted of anywhere between 4 to like 14 guards in that particular unit. And this is what happens on Saturday. And the guys, Jesus lies in the tomb, and the Roman guards are there. In fact, they've secured the tomb right now ×2. So if there was any hope for the disciples that Jesus Christ will ever resurrect, it's over. Because these guys were willing that in case anything happened, they will annihilate anyone who had even had an idea to bring Jesus back to life. Let me bring it closer to us. Because you see, friends, it's difficult for some of us to understand the intensity of Saturday. Because Saturday is for us, Saturday is a very insignificant day. Not because nothing big happens. It is because Sunday is coming. We know the story. You and I have read the story. We've heard about the story. We've watched it in movies. And Sunday is coming. And what happens on Sunday? Jesus resurrects. You're right. And Sunday is like the greatest day in history according to us. And whether you even believe in this Jesus story or not, whether you believe in this resurrection stuff or not, the reality is that Sunday gives a good ending to a story. Regardless of what you believe in, when you read a story like this and Sunday Jesus resurrects, it gives a good ending to a story. So whenever most of us encounter the story of Jesus, we don't pay much attention to what happens on Friday and even on Saturday. In fact, you'll even find to the extent where preachers like me will even begin to pray and teach and say, you know what, don't worry my brother, my sister, your Friday is here, but don't worry because your Sunday is coming. Hallelujah. Slap 5 people and tell them your Sunday is coming. Slap another 5 and tell them your Sunday is coming. Isn't that what we do? You know, forget about Friday. Yes, Jesus died, but Sunday, the resurrection is coming. Hallelujah. I know you guys are not feeling me on this one. So please do me a favor. Do me a favor for the next few minutes. I want you to forget about Sunday and what happened and that Sunday is coming. In fact, slap those 5 people again and tell them Sunday is not coming. Sunday is not coming. And for the next few minutes, what I want you to do is try and put yourself in the shoes of the disciples. Well, maybe sandals. Because they didn't know that there was a Sunday coming. They had no idea that the resurrection day was coming. As much as Jesus had told them that he was going to rise on the 3rd day, they didn't know that Jesus was going to rise. And now they are in the day after the worst day of their lives. Jesus died on Friday, and now we are in Saturday. Jesus is dead, he's buried, and the Romans are on guard. And this is a story that is way too familiar to many of us. Because Saturday is this in-between day. Saturday is the day after, fill in the blanks. And the day before? Saturday is the day before, after that, whatever that means for you. Whatever that means for you. And the day before this, it's that in-between day. It feels like we live in a Saturday world most of the time, doesn't it? It is almost as if most areas of our lives are in this in-between time. And Saturday, let me help us understand. Saturday is the day after you have received your exit letter. And now you don't have a job, you don't have an income. And what do we say? We are in between jobs. And Saturday is that in between. What do you do when you're in that in between space? This is the day after you've buried your loved one. Yes, their death was the worst. Their death was Friday. And now you've buried your loved one. And everyone else has moved on and you're left alone in this space. Saturday is the day after you lost all your cash to this promising investment. And now not only are you broke and in debt, but your creditors are coming after you. Saturday is that season. This is the day after your doctor tells you that you've had a miscarriage and you have to start all over again. Saturday is the day after you receive this doctor's report and you realize that for the rest of your life you must live with a terminal illness. Saturday is the day after your worst. For the disciples, this is it. If you thought Friday is worse, Saturday is when reality hits you. It's when reality checks in that life is now different. Saturday is numbing. And Saturday is when most of us discover that the rock bottom has a basement. You thought things were bad until you check into Saturday. And Jesus Christ is lying in the tomb, that if there was any glimmer of hope, it's over. And the Romans are showing you that just in case you think about it, we are here to make sure it doesn't happen. The reality, guys, is that life can seem so long on Saturday. Especially the day after your worst. We don't see a way out. We desire a breakthrough, but there seems to be no activity from heaven. In fact, God's silence is deafening. It is. You expect him to speak, but he doesn't say a word. You don't see a thing from him. You're not sure how you're going to get out of it, and it is painful. Will your life ever be the same again? You ask all these questions, but no one is giving you the answers that you're looking for. Saturday is what describes most of our lives. Because you are in this day after your worst, and before you get your breakthrough, you get your blessing, or whatever it is that you want to call it, and the silence from heaven is deafening. And most of us, we don't even know how to respond in certain situations, but we still do respond. And there are three possible responses. The first one is despair. There are many of us there are those of us who lose heart, you lose hope, you lose faith. You give up and you convince yourself that this is your fate, your situation is not going to get any better. And you live in a constant state of mourning. And when you hit rock bottom, you accept that as your fate. And life is sucked out of you. In fact, some of us have met those people who when you look at them, you can be able to see that there is no life in them. You're in a state of misery. The second way that most of us respond is denial. We refuse to face reality of loss or death, or even just accepting that you're feeling pain. You refuse that things are not okay. And I want to say that church folk, you and I have perfected this. In fact, we even have language for it. We've formed language for it that sort of somehow we force a false sense of optimism. And the things that we say is that, you know what, it was God's will. It could be God's will, but we're in denial because we don't even believe it yet. Or we say that, you know what, everything works together for good. We form language around it. And we refuse to admit that we're in pain and things are difficult. Or we defer. That's the third way we respond. Now, I'm sure there are many other responses out there, but there are those of us who postpone our emotions, our feelings, our pains. And it is because you're constantly looking at the horizon for a brighter day, for a better day. And whereas it can be a good thing, where you're hoping for something, a better day to come, the reality is that many of us might be twice as disappointed when the breakthrough doesn't come. You might be twice as brokenhearted or crushed when your breakthrough doesn't come as you expected it to come, or when you expected it to come. Friends, whenever we face a difficult season in our lives, it is exactly that. It is difficult. It is painful. God is dead. He is silent in the tomb, and no one is doing anything about it. It is impossible to live in a season like that where everything that defined your hope is no longer there, and you wake up the following day and absolutely nothing has changed. And there are days when you wake up and you believe that this has to be my day. This is my day of breakthrough. This is my day of deliverance. But then you go back to bed brokenhearted, crushed, because nothing has changed. And because you and I, we know about this story of Easter. We know that Sunday is coming. And we begin to believe and wait, and we are constantly looking at the door, waiting for our breakthrough, waiting for the day that the door will be opened for our miracle. But what if Sunday isn't your miracle? What if Saturday is your miracle? What if right there in the midst of the pain, that's where your miracle is? Because the miracle of Saturday is that the eternal Son of God lies dead in a tomb. And he defeats our great enemy, death. And I love this because he defeats it not by proclaiming invincibility over it, but by submitting himself fully to it. So if you can find this Jesus in a grave, if you can find this Jesus in death, where can you not find him? Where can you not find him? Where will he not show up for you? Where does he not consider his own from heaven to earth? Where does he not consider his own? Whatever your pain, whatever your dream that has been crushed or has died, whatever your shame or disappointment, this Jesus went through it all to the depths of the grave. So what kind of pain doesn't he understand that you're going through? What kind kind of loss doesn't he understand that you're going through? He understands. And friends, I'm here to tell you that God may be silent, but he's not absent. God may be silent, but he's not absent. And this is definitely one of those truths that we love to hate, and we don't even want to talk about it, or we want to hear. God's sovereignty dictates that he can overrule circumstances in your favor, but he can also overrule your desires in certain circumstances. That's his sovereignty. The question is, will you trust him? You may not see him, you may not feel him, you may not hear him. Will you trust him? Or will you choose to go a different way because he hasn't answered your prayer, or he has taken what is important to you? God may be silent, but he's not absent. When you read this story, and I want to give you perspective that I'm hoping that it will unfold something for someone. When you read this story, and I'll encourage you, go back and read Matthew towards the end, you will find it very interesting that Saturday was the Sabbath day for the Jews in that time. That the full day of complete loss was the day that Jesus is dead and buried, and nothing happens on that day because the whole culture is supposed to cease from their normal life. They're supposed to stop. You're not supposed to do any work because that was a day that was dedicated to God. It was a day of rest and unplugging from your normal routine. So taking a whole day of rest and unplugging from your work is not easy. It's hard, and many of us know this. And I think Sabbath is hard to observe, not because we don't want a day off. I mean, who doesn't want a day off to hang out with friends and do nothing? But I think true Sabbath observance is hard because it requires us to stop with us and start with God. The Sabbath is about acknowledging that we cannot do without God. We cannot. And declaring our dependence on him, that we need him. It requires us to stop with us, stopping and being still, regardless of what we need, or regardless of what we have or even have not. And many of us are not used to this. And when you stop and be still, when you stop and start with God, here's what happens. It requires you to face your realities. It requires you to face your emotions, your feelings, to face your story, to begin to unpack your Saturday story. And as you unpack these stories, the more you grieve, the more you really grieve, the more you begin to really open up your heart to God and to others, and you grow and you mature. And it's only by facing the tragedy in our lives that will enable us to develop a true hope and expectation of what will happen in the days to come. The very day that Jesus Christ is lying in the tomb is the very day that has been set aside to symbolically acknowledge that God, we cannot do it on our own, but you can. Saturday, however long or short it is, maybe the day after your worst, but could we begin to turn it around? Could we begin to turn that season around to face our stories and our realities in God's presence and dedicate everything to him? Friends, I encourage you that when you are living in the day after your worst, be open to God. Your sisters and your brothers may never even understand what it is that you're going through. They may never understand your pain. Your spouse may never even begin to acknowledge and even understand your loss. But may you be open to God, because God may be silent, but he is not absent. Maybe your Saturday has been as short as one day or as long as 10 years. I don't know. Yes, maybe your Saturday is the chapter that you have nothing to say about. In fact, you even wish that they can erase, that somehow God can erase that chapter from your life. And you feel like this is the darkest and this is the silent that it has ever been. But I want to tell you today that sometimes those in-between chapters of our lives are the most meaningful chapters in our lives. And many of us can attest to that. Let the day after your worst not destroy your ultimate life purpose, but begin to allow it to achieve your purpose in life. Allow yourself to wrestle with God about your pain. Allow yourself to begin to acknowledge whatever it is that you're going through, that without God you cannot be able, but with God you can. It is beyond our control, because if it was in our control, maybe we would have done things very differently. But now the situation that you are in is beyond your control. And yes, he may be silent, but he's not absent. And I want to prove to you that yes, God is present, because look back in your life, look around you, and I'm sure that you will see evidence of his presence in your life. Yes, maybe the marriage is over, but look at that beautiful child that God has blessed you with. Yes, maybe you don't have an income right now, or a stable income for that matter, but look at the family that is around you, or the friends that God has blessed you with. Yes, maybe you will never be able to hold your loved one again, but will you begin to embrace the legacy that they have left behind and choose to do more than that, because what they have given to you is far much greater than maybe what they will have ever given to you while they still here. Look at your life. How many times has God extended grace towards you? How many times has God provided for you? How many times has he protected you from many things? Protected your soul, protected your past experiences. God may be silent, but he's not absent. He's just not answered your prayer the way you wanted him to in this season. It doesn't mean that he doesn't care. So I want to ask you that in this, be open to God. Be open to God. So many of us come before God and we feel like we cannot be able to be open with him. And I want to sort of invite us into a time of response. And this is what I want to tell you. Be open to God. You can go before God and tell God, God, I am angry. God, I am so disappointed in you. I don't even want to be associated with you. Because my God, who understands your pain and your shame and your humiliation, he knows what you're going through. So you can be open to him and offload to him and tell him, I'm disappointed, I'm angry, I'm bitter. Wrestle with God, wrestle with him. And I want to tell you that you can be with God on Saturday in a way that you have never been with him before. That in those moments you can find that those are the deepest moments and the most realest moments that you can have with your God in heaven. But then secondly, I want to tell you, be part of a community. Many are the times that when we are going through our worst, that we choose to isolate ourselves. And I want to ask that don't isolate yourself. Whatever it is that you are, whatever it is that you're doing, don't isolate yourself. Because God has blessed us just within this community, men and women who have wisdom. They have grace to be able to walk through with you in this worst season of your life. Be part of a life group. Be part of this community. Because these are the men and women who will walk through you with you through this season. And somehow, God will lead you to them, or even them to you. So as we are getting into this time of prayer, I want to ask us that don't give up on Saturday, regardless of how long you live in it. Because how we respond to the Saturday stories of our lives will determine whether we recognize the significance and the power of the Easter story. Because Jesus took it upon himself. He took it all upon himself, because you and I could not and cannot by ourselves. Because if we were able, I can guarantee you your life will be different right now. Because you all have chosen a different way for yourself. So I want to invite us into a time of just being open with God. And as we sing this song, my encouragement to you is that the reality is that you might feel like it has come to an end. It is over, but it's not. It is not. You may feel that God is silent, but he's not absent. He's there, right there with you. Could it be that your miracle is on Saturday? That your miracle is in the midst of that pain? Your miracle is in the midst of that deep, dark hole that you cannot be able to see the end. Because right there in that deep, dark hole, Jesus went through something that was worse off than that. So he does understand. He does understand. And I'm going to invite us, go into that space where you can be able to tell God, yes, I am in pain. Acknowledge your pain. And may that even begin to bring healing in your life. And as we sing this song, let it be of worship to God. And then at the end, we're going to pray. We're going to pray that may God give us the courage. May God give us the courage to trust in Him. To trust in Him.